Well, good afternoon once again, and my goodness, it's great to be with you on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon. If you're watching us from Arizona, you know this is a really cool May day. I think the high is only going to be 85. Next week will be over 100, but today, nice and cool. So, just had to come outdoors and enjoy being outdoors with you. So we continue our working through the letter of Paul to the Corinthians, the 15th chapter of that first letter of his, as we have been considering what it means to live in the light of the resurrection. What does the resurrection mean for us, not just for Jesus? And what do we have to look forward to? Why is it important? We've been looking at that here during the course of the last several weeks, and as we near the end of this whole season, which is called Eastertide, we'll be moving out of this, but I do want to finish this chapter. By the way, tomorrow, Thursday, is Ascension Day, and then a week from this Sunday, we call Ascension Sunday, and the next Sunday is Pentecost Sunday. So on Ascension Day, that is the day when Jesus went up from his followers and went to ascend to the throne where he sits at the right hand of God, because, as he said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. And so he goes up there not to go far away to outer space, but rather to assume his place as the rightful king of both heaven and earth, until that final day when ultimately, as we looked at last week, every enemy would be defeated, and the final culmination of his victory, which he won at the cross and on Easter morning, will finally occur. And so this is the letter that Paul is writing when he wants to kind of answer the question, well, if the resurrection means we're going to be resurrected, what's that going to be like? How's that going to happen, really? So listen to 1 Corinthians 15, verses 35 and following, and let's think a little bit about it together. But someone will ask, he says, well, how are the dead raised? With what kind of body do they come? You foolish person, he says. What you sow does not come to life until it dies. And what you sow is not the body that is to be, but a bare kernel, perhaps of wheat or some other grain. But God gives it a body as he has chosen, and to each kind of seed its own body. For all flesh is not the same. For not all flesh is the same, but there is one kind for humans, another for animals, another for birds, and another for fish. Now, before we continue, I want you to take a look at something. You know what this is right here? This is called Texas ebony. It's a tree. Well, it doesn't look like a tree, does it? But it is a tree. You know what this is called right here? This is called acacia. That's a tree too. And you know what this is right here? That's blue palo verde. Or here's another one. That's what this little thing is. It doesn't look like it, but that's what it is. Now behind me, I don't know if you can see it in the picture or not, you can see some palo verde behind me, and I actually took this off of a palo verde tree that is just outside of our picture, and this is actually another blue palo brea. That's what the Apostle Paul is saying. You look at this, let's take these pods that are a little bit easier. See, I couldn't find any off of our mesquite. I don't think they've come to that point yet. But so this is a Texas ebony, a beautiful tree where they have the ugliest pods. If you had one of them, you know the pods are kind of a pain. They'll get huge and large. But inside of this are seeds. And so what this really is a tree. It just doesn't look like it just yet. Now, how is this pod going to become a tree? Well, the pod is going to fall into the ground, and inside of it are seeds, which we tend to crack open later on. And those seeds will go into the ground, and what's going to happen to that seed? It's going to die. But out of that seed will grow a brand new tree. It's a basic principle of life, which we in the West, because we forget about the way things are grown on the farm, we often forget. But this is a basic principle of life. What Paul is saying is that is exactly what is going to be happening to human bodies. Our bodies will be planted in the ground, or even if in a terrible accident, lost at sea, or even burned. But out of the death of that body will someday come a new body. That's what he's really saying right here. How are the dead raised? You foolish person, what you sow does not come to life unless it dies. In fact, Jesus himself, I think it's John 12:24, said that as a seed is planted in the ground, unless a seed is planted in the ground, it will bear no fruit. But if it is planted in the ground and dies, it will bear fruit. John 12:24. I didn't get it quite right, but you can look it up. He's saying it's a basic principle of life, that this is exactly how life works. And so that's what resurrection will be like. Going on, he says, now there are heavenly bodies and earthly bodies, but the glory of the heavenly is one kind and the glory of the earthly is another. In other words, he's looking at the glory. In this case, he means brightness, which is one of the meanings of glory. Glory means weightiness or substantialness, but it does have to do with brightness. And don't get the impression that we're just going to be bright shining someday. But what he's talking about is the brightness of the stars. The heavenly bodies have a glory, and there's another kind of glory for things on the earth. There is the glory of the sun, and another glory of the moon, and another glory of the stars, for the stars differ from star in glory. So it is, he says, with the resurrection of the dead. What is sown is perishable. What is raised is imperishable. He's basically saying that there's a difference between the life we have now and the life we someday will have. Just as there is a difference. If this pod had a brain and you could talk to it about what it's going to be, it would have no conception. In fact, when you put that pod in the ground, had it a mind of its own, it would feel like it was dying, and in fact it would be dying. But out of its death would come something brand new. It would become what it was meant to be. It's not meant to be a pod. It's meant to be a tree. See? All right. So it is with the resurrection of the dead. What is sown is perishable. What is raised is imperishable. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness. It is raised in power. If you think about our particular bodies, we have perishable bodies. As we age, we see no matter what we do, age has its effect on us, and someday it wins. Someday we'll have a body which is imperishable. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory. There are things about our bodies which are troubling to us. They don't behave like we want them to. They don't do what we think they ought to. But someday they will be perfect bodies, doing glorious things. It is sown in weakness. It is raised in power. It is sown a natural body. It is raised a spiritual body. Now, as I go through this, you need to notice that he's speaking about different kinds of bodies, not embodied and disembodied. He's speaking about it being naturally empowered or spiritually empowered, but the it is actually a body, that it has a very different kind of empowering substance. It's a little bit like an electric vehicle. A Tesla, for example, is a car just like another car, but on the inside it's entirely different. In the same way, we will have a new body someday. It will be different than us, but it will be recognizable as ourselves, just as Jesus himself was recognizable. But it will be substantially different on the inside. It will be powered very differently. So we might take the analogy that a car, an internal combustion engine, is a natural body, and that an electronic vehicle is a supernatural body. It's a different kind of empowerment, not a disembodiment, but a re-embodiment with a different life source. Okay? It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. If there's a natural body, there's also a spiritual body. Thus, as it is written, the first Adam became a living being, the last Adam became a life-giving spirit. God breathed into Adam and he became a living being. But now Jesus is referred to as the second Adam when the spiritual life of God was inside of him, and it will be then given to us. But it is not spiritual that is first, but the natural, and then the spiritual. In other words, first it starts as a pod, then it becomes a tree. There is a natural order. The pod must become a seed, put into the ground, and a tree will sprout from it. We are born first with natural life, but someday we will be put in the ground And we will, at the last resurrection of the dead, that's coming up next week, we will then be given a spiritual life. Okay? But it is not the spiritual that is first, but the natural, and then the spiritual. The first man was from the earth, a man of dust. The second man is from heaven, and that's of course Jesus, heavenly empowered. As was the man of dust, so also are those of the dust. And as is the man of heaven, so also are those who are of heaven. You see, as we're born once in Adam's nature, in the image of God, yet fallen because of sin. But we are born again by the power of Jesus Christ, and we are given his heavenly power ultimately. Okay? Just as we have borne the image of the man of dust, we shall also bear the image of the man of heaven. That's part of the beauty of the gospel. That yes, death still has its way in our world, and we experience that. Well, we experience it a lot in our culture today, right now. But death does not have the last word. In fact, death is the means by which new life ultimately emerges, just as it was for Jesus. Now, we will read next week that we will then find that this occurs at the last day when Jesus returns. But that's for next week. The point at this point that he wants us to know, he just wants them to take a look at the fields and to realize that you plant one thing in the ground and something new and better comes up. In the same way, we will someday have a new body. It'll be a better body. And that's how the resurrection works. And how do we know it's true? We know it's true because Jesus himself was raised from the dead. So be joyful. Be joyful to know that no matter what we go through in our lives here today, Jesus can always be counted on to bring new life, even out of death. God bless you. Have a happy day, and I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday at 1 o'clock here, Arizona time.